Welcome back to another episode of The Transformers, the creation of $1 billion brand. In the last episode, we were finishing out the cast of voice actors, and I was talking about Casey Kasem, who played the voice of Cliffjumper on the Transformers animated series, but he was famous before that for playing the voice of Shaggy on Scooby-Doo. And to round out this cast of voice actors, you had Corey Burton and Dan Gilvezan playing Spike and Bumblebee, who, when the series was picked up after the miniseries, which we were going to discuss in a second, played Spike and Bumblebee respectively. And even though at first they wanted Dan Gilvezan to play both Bumblebee and Spike, Wally Burr didn't think that was particularly helpful for the voice actor, and so he had Corey Burton, who played Shockwave, as well as Spike on the animated series. Shockwave being the maniacal henchman of Megatron when they, in the miniseries, when the Decepticons followed the Autobots to Earth, he was left in charge of Decepticon operations on Cybertron. Now, to get to the miniseries itself, that miniseries was a seminal event, and as I said before in an early episode, Joe Bacall, Margaret Loesch, and Tom Griffin would only take the things that they needed to take from Bob Budiansky and Marvel Comics' treatment of the story arc, and they left quite a bit of the Cold War elements in there, although they changed a couple of the origin features of the toy line and certainly of the story for the animated miniseries, and then going into the regular series itself. John Gibbs was the senior director of the animated series, or the miniseries that started the whole regular cartoon. And the writer of the original More Than Meets the Eye miniseries was George Arthur Bloom. Now, when the series hit the airwaves on September 17th, 1984, the focus was the search for energy. So that was the main part of the script. Now, the scripts, very interestingly, had to have 3 acts. And in the 3 acts, and this would carry on for the series, you had to have in the first act a build-up to some kind of climax, certainly, and then you would have the commercial, and then the climax of the first act would be resolved, and then the plot would continue, and then the resolution would be, if it wasn't in terms of the miniseries or a 2-part series, would be in the third act. And where you had Nelson Shin, of course, and I'll put his name there, because in the storyboarding, Nelson Shin was the person who was in charge of the general animation. But what the people who were writing the episodes and the story arcs, what they had to do for the animation people was not only storyboard, but also tell people what characters were in the scene, certainly, what movements they wanted the animated character to make, and they also had to keep the color schemes correct, which did not always, as we know, materialize perfectly. So that you could have scenes that had characters, or at least the color schemes of characters, that were not in the, or not supposed to be in the scene. And one of the things that Hasbro gave to the people at both Sunbow and Marvel Productions, but particularly Sunbow, was the characters that they wanted used in the various episodes. The storylines could totally be under the control and command of Jay Bacall and the team of writers, but you had to use various characters as far as Hasbro was concerned in the episodes. But to go back into the original 3-part miniseries, the Decepticons, as Joe Bacall really wanted to emphasize, came to Earth in search of energy. And that certainly, as I said before, harkened back to the energy crisis that was largely blamed, and rightly so, on what happened in terms of OPEC. But nevertheless, the search for energy, the building of the Ark, and the Decepticons following in their ship, the Nemesis, and they are crashed into a volcano, which in the comic book was named in terms of Mount St. Helena. But in the cartoon series, it was just a random volcano. And they landed here in prehistoric times, and Teletran 1, very interestingly, resuscitated the Decepticons first, and Megatron was able to get a head start in the Autobots in terms of reconnoitering the Earth. And Starscream inadvertently would lead to the resuscitation of the Autobots by trying to bury them further into the mountain. But nevertheless, there were a lot of images that stuck out. Joe Bacall, as well as Jay Bacall, wanted various scenes to reflect more of the scenic, or certainly wanted the various scenes in that first part of the episode to have some palpable travel sites, or certainly things that were prominent in the news back then. And you had the first battle of the Autobots and the Decepticons on Earth on the oil rig, and the highlighting, of course, which was in the comics, but was really brought to life in terms of the cartoon series, the highlighting of the Autobots, even though they are able to fly. Nevertheless, they are bad in the air and can have more or better warriors on the ground, and that certainly carried over from the comic. You also had the battle on Sherman Dam, which was supposed to be, I guess, a substitute for Hoover Dam. But you had the cataclysmic, I shouldn't say cataclysmic, you certainly had the seminal battle between Megatron and Optimus Prime on Sherman Dam. And that's where you had the energy mace and the energy axe, which respectively belonged to Optimus Prime and Megatron. And Megatron got Optimus Prime, got the better of Optimus Prime in that scene. But of course, it introduced this very interesting dynamic between the toy line. This is the reason why I mentioned this battle between the toy line and the actual cartoon series, because the toy did not come with those attachments. And so children had to use their imagination in order to relive or redo those battles using the toy. Of course, the toy of Megatron would not have the gun in the back, even though you could if you were smart enough to manipulate the toy. Even though you could reposition the gun to the back, but the gun would be in the pelvis of Megatron in terms of the toy line. And none of the toys, even in terms of Ironhide and Ratchet, would really match. As a matter of fact, they didn't even match what you saw in terms of the cartoon. And the original toy line did not have a spark plug or a Spike mini action figure. Now, this is a spoiler alert. The original episode ended with the Nemesis crashing back onto Earth in the water and Megatron escaping. And that started a original episode order for the rest of the cartoon series. And that cartoon series, you would have a total of, let me see here, 65 episodes in the first 2 seasons.